You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. This is me and Julian working our way through the Twilight Zone episode by episode. We're well into season 2, and we're going to be going back there. Back to, not the future, back to a specific night in American history. So, Julian, what are your initial thoughts on back there? Because I think we're going to have some very specific conversation we have repeatedly.
About time travel.
About time travel, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because they start the episode at this sort of rich club where they're debating, they're having a discussion from Stories Out of Time and Space about like, how would time travel work? Can you change the past? They stole our mojo.
Yeah. I like the conversation they're having though. Just to give sort of a round up for the listeners. So it's about this gentleman. Another gentleman's club. This is clearly sort of, I like this notion. They're having this conversation around time travel. They're disagreeing, and then one of the guys decides to leave. And as he leaves the club, and we'll get into how much I like the moment of the time slip and how well it works. He has a time slip moment, and he goes back to a specific moment in history, the night that Abraham Lincoln was shot, and he goes back with the knowledge and attempts to prevent the assassination. Is unsuccessful, but when he returns to the present day, or to the 1960s, he finds that whilst the majority of history has returned to normal, there have been some slight changes. So that's sort of the gist of it. But you're right, this episode kicks off with this idea, and I like the idea that they use of the 1929 crash.
Yes.
This idea of like, well, if you were to go back and have these funds, and actually you pulled the funds, you could make a fortune. And then someone else says, oh yeah, but you could actually be the one that caused the crash by in that action of pulling it. You become, as you say, sort of, it's an inevitable. So you can't change history because you actually then orchestrate it. So I liked this conversation that was going on at the beginning of the episode. Yes, I felt at home in it.
Yeah, I did too, and we like time travel stories. I mean, and so just knowing that this is going to be a time travel story, it's your juices are already flowing. And I do like the Lincoln stuff. I mean, he does seem to have contributed to the events in this. A man who this actor looks a lot like John Wilkes Booth, so he's told John Wilkes Booth like Lincoln's going to die tonight. Now, in reality, I mean, a couple very minor quibbles. John Wilkes Booth was a very famous actor, and people would have known his name, which
and
they
his
don't
face.
seem to. Yes,
Yeah.
quite so. And secondly, John Wilkes Booth killed Lincoln as part of a conspiracy with a bunch of Southerners.
Yeah.
And so it's not like here there's no mentions of that, and in fact, there were collaborators in the administration who worked on that conspiracy. So it's not as if that is not only absent here, but there seems to be a suggestion or an implication that it's possible that the time traveler gave John Wilkes Booth the idea in some way. Which can't be the case because this does change time, and yet, so this happened before. John Wilkes Booth had killed Lincoln before, but I do like the Lincoln stuff, despite the two little quibbles.
No, I agree. I really liked it as well, actually, and I was interested in how you would read it, because I think I read the way you read it. This idea of like, has he given this idea, in confirming this has happened? Has he given him the idea? And then I sort of read it a different way, in that, he was going to do it. It was all set up to do it. And then he has this crazy person running around town saying it's going to happen. And he's like, I need to shut this guy up and have him sort of like shown to be, mentally unstable. And so he introduces himself as a psychiatrist and then this other thing. And so And it was interesting to me that once I read it as almost like intervention, John Wilkes Booth acting as a psychiatrist, and it was almost like an intervention, like, oh, I've got to get this person out the way. Like, I'm not going to kill him. I'm just going to drug him, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to commit this act. But like, he's confirmed that this is going to happen, so I'm feeling a lot more confident, because he says as he's leaving, he says, Lincoln's going to die tonight. He says, yes, you've convinced me of that. And I think you can read that as, or I'm believing you as, like, he's given the idea, or he was intending to do it and he feels more confident it's actually going to happen now because this guy is sort of like, prophesied it or whatever. So I liked that as this sort of, when it was revealed he was John Wilkes Booth, I was like, oh, I can read that a couple of ways. I kind of like that it didn't change history, like the grand scheme of history, because it's a fixed event, but did he sort of give him more confidence that it was going to happen?
Yeah, well, let's return to the fixed event thing, because I can feel the bristles rising on my neck. But I will say that another quibble that I have is that the police release him into John Wilkes Booth custody. And, he simply says that he's an expert in mental illness and identifies himself as John Wellington. And the cops are like, sure, we'll give you this guy. It seemed a little, over the top. But I do want to say before we go on that, I don't know if this is me as an American or, a history buff or what. I've been to Ford's Theater, I know this stuff. And history would have been very different had Lincoln lived. And I found myself feeling something watching this, thinking about all of the historical research that I've done in American history. And one of the worst things that, America has ever done is betray the Reconstruction of the South, and betray the real emancipation of blacks, and allow the South to really to overthrow black governments, and to be, after readmission, to go down the path toward a Jim Crow apartheid state. And that was not going to happen under Lincoln.
No.
And so I did feel a sort of, not just for, I like Lincoln, but not just for, I don't fetishize him the way some do, but I do feel this sort of, I like those moments where history pivots, and where really one incident or one man really does change an awful lot.
Yeah, and like you say, that there are those moments throughout history where you think, like, it's weird. I read recently, a story of a German soldier getting lost in no man's land after attack, and shell shocked, whatever, heading towards the British trenches, and instead of opening fire on him, they sort of fired past him to give him a chance to get away. It turns out that German soldier was Hitler, and sort of now you're going like, all right, well, if those British soldiers are gone, screw this lost German soldier, the 20th century takes a very different turn. And so there are instances where sort of like, decisions are made and things are changed. But could I go back to that trench in 1917, 1918 and be like, no, don't give him a chance, shoot him? Could I make that happen? Obviously, I don't think time travel is technically possible, but, like, could I, if it was, could I go back to that trench and go shoot that person? And then, in this case, could they have prevented the assassination of Lincoln?
Well, so let's get into that. Let's fight it out. So just to remind the listeners, in this episode, when the main character, Peter Corrigan, goes back to the Potomac Club. He's back in 1961. Good old 1961. He finds that earlier on, before he left, there was an attendant who spilled a drink on him. And now that attendant is sitting at the table and is, one of the rich guys. And he discovers that it was his ancestor who was the cop who sort of took him seriously. And so that fame allowed him to become rich over time. And this is his great grandson, who now is a rich man. So there has been this change of history. But the narrative, the point we're supposed to take is that, as you say, there are sort of like fixed elements. There are fixed events. You can't change Lincoln's assassination. No matter what you do, that's fixed. But there are things on the periphery that you can change. I think this is an effective episode. I like this episode. That is some bullshit and really, really dumb and the worst of both worlds.
It's
now
interesting.
Let's fight.
No, because you're right. Because one of the things is, like you say, when you change anything in history, like it has that ripple effect. Because again, like you say, there's a line as well when he says the conversation he comes back to is no longer about time travel. It's about what is the best way to accumulate wealth. And this guy that was an attendant and is now a wealthy man actually says the best way is to have an ancestor that got rich, which again is quite a sort of an anti-capitalist statement, because it's sort of like, this program, so you can't achieve the American dream, it's best to inherit. But again, if this,
you say that, and yet both of our countries are filled with people who consider themselves capitalists, who are real defenders of inherited wealth.
Yes. But the other point is, like, if he has that wealth has been channeled, that wealth has been maintained through whether it be investments or new businesses being set up. If it's a new business, then that new business is providing a product or a service and has employees. So all through history, those people, their history has been changed.
Mm-hmm.
So how has their history changed that's then impacted the wider world? Did they not meet someone? Did they not meet the woman then that would become their wife? So then they don't have the children that they had in the past timeline. So you can't. You're right. I agree. You can't change one and not the other. This idea of having fixed events, because just because a fixed event happened, if things around it changed, then the next fixed event still may not happen. Everything is connected. So I do agree with this idea of I can't believe, but I can believe you this idea of, I like this idea of time as if you do change things and it has ripples.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. I struggle with this idea of having a fixed event that you can then change things around it, and time will find a way, to sort of crib from somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, it is very timey-wimey, right? It is. Yeah. I mean, and Doctor Who does, do this exact same thing. And again, I like this episode. I don't want to put all of this pressure on, a 1961 episode. But yeah, I mean, it does not make sense. Either you can change time or you can't. Either you're in a deterministic universe or you're not. And as you say, these so-called minor events, I mean, it's really offensive to pretend that history is only the great men, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is a fixed event because, why? Because God? Why is this so important and other things aren't? But also, as you say, there would be these vast ripples. What about all the fixed events? Like if you had a time traveler from the year 30,000, who came back and said, right, you didn't change a fixed event of Lincoln's assassination, but by the time you get, 1,000 years after that, you've changed everything. My entire continuity is completely changed because of what you've done. But it's always this kind of nonsense, timey-wimey, having the best of both worlds, being able to have things that are determined and have things that are not, is always at the service of a certain character's point of view. Yeah. And a certain point in history's point of view.
Yeah, and again, I'm very much of the opinion that, you subscribe to a deterministic universe that it's all sort of set out, and you can back that up, with more sort of like physics related answers. I believe, or lean at least more towards a non-determinate universe, mainly because I've watched lots and lots of films. So, but no, I do like the idea of being able to change history. Like it, if time travel is possible, then by you being there, you are starting to change things. And again, it can be
except if you were always already there.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? Again, we've gone back to this thing around the loop again, like the Terminator, sort of like that closed loop of like, okay, well, who was you, as you've said, but who was John Connor's father the first time round? So, well, there is no first time round. It's always been Carl Reese. It's always been that deterministic loop. So if I'm always going to go back, but then you get the paradox of like, well, if I'm going to go back and kill my own grandfather, then you get that sort of thing. And why would you ever want to? That's a ridiculous question, but you have that paradox. But in this is suggesting that yes, even if he taken it, he was unsuccessful, because you could read this another way and say actually he could have prevented Lincoln's death if he'd have really tried something different. He was just unsuccessful, and actually the ending of the episode actually shows that he wasn't successful, but he could have done what he set out to do.
I think that's a better reading. I mean, I like that reading. I mean, that's certainly a more consistent. I don't think that that is the show's answer. I think we're supposed to believe in this whole fixed event kind of nonsense. But you're right that is totally possible. There's no reason. It's not that we don't need to believe that there is an unseen hand of fate keeping, putting its thumb on the scale and saying, Lincoln is off limits.
Yeah, not that one. This person here, fine. The other thing I want to quickly talk about, I'll quickly mention the moment of passing through time, because it's not done with like a time machine or anything else. It's done as a time slip, which is a phenomenon that is reported and is not as sort of like concrete as this episode has suggested, but there are stories of people walking into buildings or streets or turning corners and stuff and being in a different time and seeing things from a different time. But I like the way they sort of like, he has a headache or something, it phases out and it phases back in, and his clothes have changed. But there's a wonderful picture of like the lamp on the corner of this club goes from being an electric lamp to being a candlelit lamp, and I thought that was really well done. Another shot that they've done in this series that I'm just like, yeah, that was a really well thought out. Like, I don't want to do a time machine, we don't want to do that, like we're going to keep this low budget, but it's effective, and I actually really like the choices they made around that.
I agree 100%. I mean, I do, and that's a good point about the shot. The shot is really great.
Yeah, it's just one of those sort of things again where I was like, because when they start talking about time travel, I was like, oh, it's going to be, you get what the episode's going to be. I was like, how are they going to do it? And when they did that, I was like, nice. Yeah, that's a simple, elegant solution that, like, there's no elaborate story of introducing a scientist in a time machine. Like, an early version of Doc Brown doesn't turn up in a, some of the 60s car. So I like that. But I like the fact that it had the impact that it did. But I'd like to say it's one of those ones, like a wider sort of. We've talked about this before about episodes that would be nicer if they were sort of slightly longer. This was one of those ones for me. It was like, I'd like this to be slightly longer to sort of explore. He says at the end of it, he's like, I've got to go home. Okay, well, what's the sort of the ripple effect of this person being rich? Like, I want to just see something else that sort of suggests that there's actually something slightly off, with the rest of the world. It made me think of like the Simpsons episode where Homer keeps going back to trying to fix everything, and every time he comes back, like, it's slightly worse. Sort of like there's a time traveling toaster. It's one of the first early Tree Houses of Horror episodes, and the first time he goes back and he comes back and sort of like it's a very mild. I don't like that. So he goes back and each time he does it, like, and eventually sort of like they're all lizard people, or they don't have donuts or something like that. What is the wider sort of ripple effect? Even just suggesting what the wider ripple effect would be of this event.
Yeah, I don't know that they want there to be one. I mean, and I do truly detest The Simpsons, but I know what you're talking about. I don't think that they want there to be a wider ripple effect, right? I think the idea is that, which I think is an offensive idea, is that you can sort of like leave the great men and great events intact, but the rest of us, hoi polloi, we can be changed, and and you see this a lot in movies and time travel, especially in live action stuff, and it is really offensive. I don't know that this needs to be longer. I like what you're saying. One of the things that if it were longer that I would like to see is I'd like to see Peter struggling with the trauma of, like, yes, you can say that was a fixed event, but he doesn't know that. I mean, can you imagine, like, first of all, who are you going to tell that you had this time slip? And then, you're going to struggle with the idea of, like, could I have saved Lincoln? Did I screw this up? Am I to blame for, us needing to have a civil rights movement and dogs being hosed and, lynching, thousands of people being murdered, by organized terrorism? I mean, could I have prevented that? That's going to screw you up.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one, actually, if it was more like, I appear to have really sort of set this country's trajectory for race relations because I cocked up this one moment. Yeah. I mean, you could flip it the other way. I mean, if they'd really wanted to go down that path, it could have gone the other way, that in the opening episode, or in the opening part of the show, Lincoln hadn't been shot. And then you have them talking about time travel, and him going back in time actually results in Lincoln being shot. Yeah. And then he'd be like, "Oh, actually, I've really cocked up this." Yeah. Again, like Red Dwarf, we keep talking of relation, but like Red Dwarf obviously did this, but they did it with JFK, where they actually prevented Kennedy from being shot, and it turns out that he then gets arrested. He gets
blackmailed by the mob.
That's right, yeah. And ends up sort of like, the country then gets nuclear weapons dropped on it because of, through Cuba, because he's not there, and all this other stuff. So it could go down interesting lines. But again, it's only 24 minutes. But yes, I like what this episode does. I actually quite enjoyed this episode, and I like the discussion that they were having as part of it. Any final thoughts for
I think it's a fun, not amazing, but it's a fun, solid, another Twilight Zone episode.
Yes, I did enjoy this one. It's this might be one I'll go back to, because it did make me think. I thought there was some quite good bits in it. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I hope you like it, and let us know what you think about time travel, or if you're from the future, hell, get in contact. Let us know that whether or not we are affecting the timeline. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for supporting. Thank you very much for listening, and we shall talk to you on the next episode.